All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Very excited to be here today as we kick off our 2019 Educator to Educator webinars. Today's webinar is actually going to be teaching to the learning modalities. My name is Jason Smith and I am an Efficacy and Implementation Manager in the Northeast, and I work with today's presenter, Sarah Stork, our training specialist out of Philadelphia. If you're already on Twitter and you would like to grow your own personal PLN, follow us at SmartPLN. We use this Twitter handle to pass out challenges, sample lessons, and resources, trying to keep our educational group connected and always trying to pass on anything good that we've done. Anytime you do something good, you should highlight your work, right? It's always a best practice to let those out there see the good things that you're doing so that they can take those same good things and transform them into their own good things. So we always use the hashtag SmartChampion.
Well, thank you, Jason, and welcome again, everyone, to today's webinar and teaching to the learning modalities. I'm very excited to be with you all today, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join us to develop your own understanding of this topic and how smart solutions can best support your teaching practices. So my name is Sarah Stork, and I'm a training specialist with Smart Technologies. Prior to joining Smart, I spent 11 years as an elementary classroom teacher, and as a former teacher, I understand the challenges that come along with planning instruction for students with diverse learning needs. Whether I was teaching in a general education classroom or teaching at a school for students with learning disabilities, I found incorporating interactive technology allowed students to activate their own learning in a variety of ways through multiple modalities. Again, you can join today's presentation by going to hellosmart.com and entering in the class code 88286. You'll see we'll have some activities coming up that you can contribute to. My email is also listed here, sarahstork@smarttech.com. All right, so during our time together today, we'll take a look at the learning modalities. We'll specifically focus on visual, auditory, and hands-on kinesthetic tactile learning. You'll have the opportunity to experience example uses of Smart Learning Suite that will enable students to engage in content using the multiple modalities, and as we focus on meeting the learning needs of students. At the end of our time today, you'll hopefully walk away with a new perspective on teaching while using multiple modalities, and how you can use Smart Learning Suite to teach to these modalities. So what are the learning modalities, and how can we represent these in the classroom? Well, visual learning will most likely take the shape of these examples, such as charts, graphics, or students watching demonstrations. If you have students that prefer auditory learning, they may prefer discussions, spoken directions, or audiobooks to help them support their reading fluency or reading comprehension. Kinesthetic or hands-on learning is more of our learning by doing, maybe manipulating objects or having hands-on learning time, or allowing students to draw or doodle while they're learning, giving them some opportunities to have meaningful physical movement that accentuates and helps what the learning goals are. Instruction including multiple modalities reminds me of this quote by Albert Einstein. "I never teach my pupils, I only attempt to provide the conditions in which they can learn." And our focus here today is finding ways to help our students access the curriculum and express their own learning in multiple different ways. It's really providing those conditions that really help students meet their learning goals. Right here at the bottom of this page, if you have some time later, once you have access to this file, you can take a look at this PDF reference it'll take you to, which will break down visual, auditory, tactile, and kinesthetic learning. It will give you some more examples of what students may prefer in the classroom if they prefer one of these learning modalities, or how you can incorporate all of these modalities into your teaching. So why should we teach using multiple modalities? Planning instruction using the lens of multiple modalities allows teachers to differentiate instruction, not just by altering the content, but also allowing students to access information in a variety of ways using visual, auditory, and kinesthetic movement. You'll also provide your students with a variety of learning opportunities to guide them towards understanding of the lessons presented. Planning instruction with the modalities in mind allows you to meet the needs of diverse learners who may come into your classroom with a variety of learning profiles, and also they may come from different cultural backgrounds. Incorporating multiple modalities will also allow instruction to become more meaningful and allow students to make connections between concepts and their own experiences, and will hopefully create meaningful memories for students as we encourage lifelong learning. Research behind these concepts can be found in these links below. This will give you some more information. And also, once you have access to this file in the attachments here, there are some more resources you can take a look at if you'd like to take a bit of a deeper dive into teaching with multiple modalities and why that is important in our classrooms. There is an article here from Psychology Today that gives you a little more information on the brain research behind teaching with different senses, which is definitely an interesting read. All right, so as we get started today, we're going to take some time to experience lesson examples in various content areas. We'll begin with English language arts and social studies examples, and then we'll continue on with math and science examples. In our lessons today, and student activities, and you'll see center examples, these were created using Smart Notebook, which is the software that will allow you to create interactive lessons that enrich learning experiences in the classroom. Smart Notebook also includes the ability to create assessments, activities, and game-based learning that enhances classroom instruction. So here's your opportunity to give me a little information and to share how you would use learning modalities in your classroom. So again, you can enter the class at hellosmart.com and code 88286. So before we get into some of the examples, I'd love to hear how you might use the learning modalities in your current position or as currently in your teaching. So how would you incorporate visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning? You can start this activity by entering in some text or information, maybe a word, maybe a phrase, and give us a little bit of feedback on how you would incorporate these modalities. So I'll start this activity. And when you're ready, you can give us some information, give us a little bit of feedback so we can hear how you incorporate the modalities with your students. The shouted out activity is one that you can create a notebook that will allow students to contribute text, and they can also contribute images. At the end of this file, you'll see there is a page with helpful resources that will help walk you through the steps in creating a shouted out activity for your own class. As you can see, we have some text coming up on our screen visually, and we can spend some time discussing and having that auditory conversation about these responses that we're seeing. If I wanted to include some kinesthetic learning in this activity, I could encourage my students to come up to the Smart Interactive Flat Panel to move and sort these responses, maybe categorize some of their responses. So we'll take a look at some of these great examples. Wow. All right. So some image searches. We could 3D models. These are great visuals. Anchor charts, images that go along with vocabulary, more images. Great. Modeling. Awesome visual examples there. Auditory, attaching sound to text. Podcasts are another great way to allow your students, they could even record their own voices, they could record their own understanding of a topic, speeches, music, sound effects, partner talk, all great ways to incorporate auditory learning. Kinesthetic, using brain breaks. That can be a great way to have your students moving around, including songs and images. So there you're including lots of different modalities. Stand up, hand up, pair up. Get kids up and moving around. Mindful walkabouts, some movement, clapping, tapping, jumping, and allowing students to move images or text. So these are all great examples of how we can incorporate the different modalities into our learning. As a teacher, I could also save this page and refer back to this shouted out activity with my class I might use this to introduce a new topic as we're using it today, or maybe to review, and I could save this information and come back to it. So thank you all for contributing all this amazing information. We'll stop this activity for now. So thank you so much for those of you who had a chance to contribute. We are going to move on to our next activity here. So let's take a look at another way to elicit feedback from students concerning their own learning preferences. As we start this assessment activity, if you are logged into our class, your screen will change, and you will notice that now you have access to an assessment. And in this response to activity, I have set up this assessment to allow students to contribute their opinion on the classroom environment. So I would use a similar lesson component in my own classroom, possibly at the beginning of the school year, to set learning expectations and learning agreements as a group. So if you're logged into the class, you can see the questions, but I can also show the questions and go through them. And I can see that we're making great progress. So I might ask my class what noise level they prefer, one voice, many voices, or do they like music in the background? We saw examples from the Shout It Out activity that music would be a great way to incorporate auditory learning. We might also talk about what helps you learn best. Do you like visuals? Do you like listening? Do you like that hands-on time or being able to talk about a concept? What strategies do you use to remember information? Do you like to write things down or read information or listen and watch a speaker? And I may also talk to my class about what's important to you as a learner. Do you like time to ask questions or time to listen? Do you like to try concepts on your own? Now, in this activity, I can also show the live results. So I can see, wow, many people in our group, they really like to have time to try the concept on their own. So they like to have that hands-on time to try something on their own. Our group, it looks like many of our participants, they like to take notes, but they also like to actively try steps while steps are being presented. That seems pretty neck and neck right now. So those are two things that I would think about incorporating into my teaching and learning. That looks like, again, that hands-on learning, trying a concept on your own. That's something that many people in our group would want as we're trying new topics. And we see that many people like one voice at a time or quiet music in the background. But many voices and noises not very important to our group. So that's something I may not incorporate in my teaching on a regular basis. Now, I will end this activity. So thank you all for contributing your ideas. And as I end this activity, we can review. And as a teacher, then I could export these results. We can review the results on the screen, but also I could export the results, and if I click here, I can actually save these results in an Excel spreadsheet, and I can easily refer back to it later on in the school year. All right, so let's begin by looking at some examples of English language arts and social studies instruction. So as I said, we're going to take a look at math and science also later on in our time together. Now, as we think about English language arts instruction, many times this type of instruction involves written visuals, oral discussions, maybe read-alouds, but let's try to think outside the box a little bit. How can we focus on incorporating kinesthetic movement? So the strategy guide listed down here, this will take you to some more ideas to help you plan English language arts instruction that involves using more kinesthetic movement and involving the multiple modalities. This quote here reminds us that the more ways we teach, the more likely we reach our students and hone their ability to learn. So how are we going to reach our students in a variety of different ways and give them an opportunity to access information that best fits their learning style, and that brings in these different modalities to really strengthen their understanding of a topic? All right, so our first lesson example is a flip out activity. We have some music here that goes along with the activity. So if I wanted to incorporate some of that music, I could. I can start this activity for you, and you will receive a copy of the activity, of the flip out cards, if you're logged into hellosmart.com using our class code 88286. If you've been disconnected, you can get right on back in there. So flip out, when you create this activity, you're going to be able to engage your students in this visual representation. They're going to be able to flip the cards and engage in some of these questioning prompts or prompts during a read aloud. So I might use this as a whole group activity while we're reading. I may ask students to walk up to the Smart Interactive Flat panel and have some of that kinesthetic movement. And they can choose one of these cards. So they may choose a visual way to represent their understanding. So we might describe the setting. What does it look like in your mind? They're going to be able to describe visually what they're seeing after reading a story or participating in a read aloud. Maybe a student may choose an auditory card. Tell a neighbor a summary of what we read. Or maybe a student might choose a kinesthetic or a more hands-on activity, such as drawing a picture of the main character. Some other examples are to talk to your group, make a prediction, use clues from the story, or act out an event from the story. And our last example, write the main idea on your paper. Check the answer with your group. Now, this activity gives students some choice. I could allow students to use this on a device, work in a small group, or work with partners, and they can choose which activities they complete. Or if we're working as a whole group, I can allow students to choose which cards they would like to complete. And choices allow students to demonstrate their learning in a way that best fits their learning needs or preferred style, which will help engage students in the activity and give them more ownership. All right, so our next example is a graphic organizer, which is a common lesson component in classrooms. Graphics provide visuals for students, and if we incorporate some drawing as the instructions in this activity, we're going to allow students to engage in a more hands-on learning to hopefully make some connections between the events in the story. I could also ask my class to add some more kinesthetic learning to this activity, and they could build a 3D model. I think this is one of the examples that we had in our Shout It Out activity where someone said that we could build a 3D model. If I wanted to level up this activity even more, I could use Smart Learning Suite Online, which would allow me as a teacher to turn my notebook lesson into more of a mobile learning space that students could access on their own devices. And it would allow students to learn at their own pace. I can create a collaborative workspace in Smart Learning Suite Online that allows students to contribute the written information, drawings, text, or pictures to a common space. And then as a teacher, I could then have access to these workspaces, and which would allow students to share their work on the interactive flat panel, which will encourage classroom discussion and student presentation of information. If you'd like to learn more about Smart Learning Suite Online or how to create lessons and to use collaborative workspaces, towards the end of the file, there are some resources that will help you learn how to use Smart Learning Suite Online and collaborative workspaces. So we'll continue on to our first social studies lesson example. This example is using rank order, and it's another activity that I could build in Smart Notebook. And this activity, students are going to be able to visually view the events of, say, the Civil War, for example, and then when they're done with the activity, when they've put the events in order from first to last, they're going to create a vertical timeline. So they can pull over the information. Let's see here. All right, Lee surrenders to Grant. That's the last event. Yes, I had it correct. I can pull over different events. John Brown's raid. All right, I had that one correct. And at the end, I'm going to have a nice vertical timeline, which is going to be a nice visual of what happened first, next, and last in the Civil War. If I wanted to level up this activity a little bit more and encourage my students to use skills like evaluate, I could change this activity to have where the answers would not be correct or incorrect. I could change it so that it would not check the answers. And what we could do as a group is come together and decide which event was most important to the Civil War, which was least important, and that's really going to encourage that auditory component and that discussion. If I come up here to this pencil right in the corner, this is how I can edit this activity in order to change checking answers to don't check, and then like I said, we could have that conversation about which events were most important or least important. All right, so our next activity is going to be a game. We've been working pretty hard on these activities, so it's time to look at a game. This is Speed Up Racers. So if I press start, you can see that students can come up to the interactive flat panel, have some kinesthetic movement. They would choose their racers, and then they're going to be able to visually see the questions. I may also have students working in groups, which will encourage that team talk and collaborative conversation. And so as they're going to read and visually see the question, visually see the answers, we'll have our movement where students are coming up to the board and interacting with the questions. And we got this correct, and we're going to see our racers are going to go a little faster, and we can see our progress. So the speed racing game is going to bring our modalities and our senses all together. So students are going to be able to read the questions and see their racing progress. We're going to allow for that team talk before students choose their answers. We can even turn on the sound effects, and we're going to hear the music and effects to make this more interesting for our students and to pull in that auditory component. Students get to move to the board and choose their answers, and there's our tactile engagement and our kinesthetic engagement with the board. This activity is going to really give us an opportunity to make and to have those meaningful learning experiences that are going to help our students make connections and make those memories. We're going to have students working together towards a common goal, and they're going to be engaging in a fun game. So now let's take a look at some math and science examples. So in math and science, these subjects tend to lead a bit more towards many visuals. So we may have written equations, or we may have diagrams. Kinesthetic movement is seen many times in these subject areas through solving problems, completing science labs, and using manipulatives. But let's think outside the box. So how can we strengthen auditory components in math and science instruction? This quote, "If a student learns something using more than one sense, the information is more likely to stay with him," reminds us the importance of creating those memories for students as we're incorporating multiple modalities into our teaching and learning. So if we're incorporating the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic movement into our lessons, we're encouraging our students to remember this information and then go ahead and apply it to future learning. And so as they're expressing their learning too and showing their understanding of a topic, they're going to be able to use these different senses to express their learning and to demonstrate their learning. At the bottom of this page are two articles that speak to incorporating language and vocabulary development and using multiple modalities when it comes to science education and math subject areas, and the importance of including some language and auditory components in these subject areas. Our first example is using videos. So our first video here shows how to solve long division problems. The video is going to have visuals showing students how to solve the problems, but more than that, it's also going to include the narration by the video creator who's going to walk the students through the steps. So they're going to visually see the steps of how to solve long division problems, and they will also hear each of the steps as they walk through these problems. So for students to be able to watch someone else solving the problems and walking through the steps, it strengthens their understanding of the topic and helps them make connections between their knowledge of division and applying that to the long division. You may use videos in your classroom in a variety of different ways. You may use videos to introduce a new topic or to get students excited about a new concept. You may also use videos to strengthen students' learning and to provide support to those students who may need to see an idea or see a concept in more than one way or more than one time. So this video could be available for students as they're practicing solving long division problems. I also love to use music when I'm teaching. I find setting things to music helps students retain that information. Like we said, we want students to create those memories and to strengthen their learning. And so I would use the Schoolhouse Rock 3 as a magic number frequently in my classroom, especially as we were learning the threes times table. And as I would be practicing facts with students, we would be singing along to the song to remind ourselves of the fact families. Even in my own experiences as a student, when I was in middle school, I had a teacher, a science teacher, who set concepts to music. And I could, to this day, sing those songs. I won't, but I've remembered those concepts because they were set to music. So music can be an excellent way to provide additional learning opportunities for students and to allow students to create those lasting memories. You can quickly and easily access YouTube videos when you're using a Smart Learning Suite and Smart Notebook. So over in your side menu, when you click on this puzzle piece, you have access to YouTube videos. You can search for videos inside of Notebook and then easily put them onto your file. When you conduct a YouTube search in Notebook, you're going to eliminate, it's going to conduct a safe search, and it's going to filter out advertisements and commercials for you. And it also makes your lessons more seamless. Instead of going back and forth between different applications, you can stay within Notebook and begin your videos and have these videos available for students. I could also level up using a video activity with my students or having videos. So I could bring back the Shout It Out activity. And after asking students to watch the video or watching the video as a whole group, I could then ask students to contribute to Shout It Out, and I could ask them to add to the conversation with text or maybe with images, and I could ask them to summarize what they learned or apply their learning to a new concept. Our next lesson example is Match 'em Up. And we're going to incorporate different modalities with this activity. As you can see, we can visually clearly see the equations and the quotients. We're going to apply the learning that we started concerning long division, and now we're going to apply this to this fun activity. So what students can do is take the equation and find the quotient. They may have a whiteboard they're working on or scratch paper, and they can find their matches. Am I going to check? Oh, yes, I was correct. And now I have some fun visuals and some fun interaction that helps me engage in this activity and make those connections to what I've learned, maybe in the video or during a lesson, and now I'm going to apply that learning to this match 'em up activity. I could also differentiate this activity. So if you are still on hellosmart.com, you can hop on back over there. I'll start this activity for you. And what we're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to have a copy of this match 'em up activity. And as you complete the activity, you can work at your own pace. So I could differentiate my instruction by asking students to work on match 'em up on their own pace. They could complete this activity all together as a whole group. If I wanted my students to come to the interactive flat panel and work on our division problems all together, so we could have that auditory and oral conversation all together and talk about what are the steps to solving these problems. I may also add some more auditory learning, and I could assign the activity to partners or small groups, and students could work collaboratively to discuss their answers. I used this long division activity with a group of 5th graders recently, and students were working with partners. They had one laptop between 2 students, and they had one whiteboard. And as I walked around the room, I could hear the math conversation and math discourse as they were talking about how to solve the problems. And so it really encouraged the students to use the auditory learning component of having that discussion and talking through the steps with each other. An example of a math center activity would be to you can use these interactive dice that you can create. Over here on our side tabs, we've talked about this puzzle piece where we had YouTube videos, but our other tab over here, this is our gallery tab. And if I click here, I can search for different items. If I search for dice, these interactive dice come up, and I can customize them. When you click on dice, you can click on the gear that will show up, and then you can put in words or text. You can also put in pictures and create dice that lend well to your classroom lesson. So for math, I wanted to have numbers, and so my students could visually and clearly see the numbers as we spin the dice. And also, they're going to be able to walk up to the flat panel and use the kinesthetic movement to engage in this lesson. And as they spin their dice, it's going to be a fun and engaging way to start this center. Well, we'll take this a step further. So our next step in the center activity, I would ask my students to use a smart block to solve their equation. But it's going to be a mystery as to which operation is going to be used by this block. Over here in this puzzle piece again, where we found searching for YouTube, I can also pull out a smart block, and down here we have unknown blocks. And what will happen, as pictured here, if students write their 2 numbers that they spun on their dice, the unknown block is going to solve the equation. And what your students' job is going to be is to decide which operation was used and to explain why they think that operation was used. So was it addition or subtraction or multiplication or division? And so students are going to be encouraged to, again, have that auditory discussion as they're physically interacting with the interactive flat panel. And also these visuals are going to help them to understand which operations are happening. And as they record their answers with each other, we're going to further that visual component of walking through the steps, of solving this problem, and trying to figure out which operation was used. I could level up this activity even more, and I could, again, use that collaborative workspace in Smart Learning Suite Online. Students could share their work on the collaborative workspace, and at the end of centers for that day, we could all come together as a whole group, and as a teacher, I could then show and display the work of my students, which again is going to further that math talk and math discourse and that discussion behind which operation was used on these unknown blocks. So we're really encouraging students to pull their different learning modalities together, and we're also encouraging students to make connections between topics that they've learned previously, and they're going to apply that learning to something new, like solving an unknown math problem. So we'll get into some science examples. All right, so another game that you can create in Notebook in the activities portion, which you can access up here with this little monster. If you click here, you have different activity options. Again, at the end of this file, there are some quick links to take you to some videos to see how to create these activities. You can easily and quickly put in your information and type your questions or copy questions into here, and it will create a game show. So if we start this activity, this is another activity where students could form teams, and they would come up to the interactive flat panel, and they have some physical movement and that kinesthetic movement as they're going to spin the big wheel. There is also a music component to this activity as well. All right, so we get to spin again before we look at any of our questions. All right, so now I visually can see my question of which of the following is a compound. And so we'll answer the question. We were correct. I can see that. I have the visual reinforcement of the questions with listed answers. This activity is also going to encourage students to have some team talk and to spend time discussing with each other the answers to these questions. And so we're really asking students to pull their different modalities together, and in the end, playing this game and having students participate in the game will hopefully create a fun memory for students. And during this activity, we're encouraging them to positively communicate, to collaborate with each other, to work towards a common goal, and to apply their learning in a new and fun way that, again, is hopefully going to help them make those connections and to create those memories so that when it's time to maybe review for a test, the goal would be for students to remember this information to use and apply on that test. Or maybe I might use this activity to introduce a new topic, or maybe I might use this at the end of a lesson to review what we've done for the day. If I'm creating quiz questions in Notebook in the activities portion, I can save those quiz questions and I can reuse them in another activity, such as the speed up activity that we saw earlier. And I could also use those questions in a response activity as an assessment. So I could easily use and reuse these questions to, again, help my students to solidify their understanding of a topic and to be able to apply their learning in a new way. So our last example is one more science activity. This is called Label Reveal. This activity is going to include a variety of learning opportunities for students. What Label Reveal is showing you, you can see a visual, which were definitely some of the examples that you provided of visual learning, is to have pictures. We can have diagrams on using a Label Reveal activity. And what students are going to be able to do is physically walk to the interactive flat panel and click on these question marks to see the names of the different parts of the bee. I could also have students working on individual devices or working in small groups or partners to, again, encourage that conversation relating on the science topic. And then students can also, or as a whole group, we can click on the plus sign, and now we have a discussion prompt. So explain the job of the antenna. And as a group, we would talk about what is the job of the antenna. So we could keep going, and what are the parts of the bee's head. I can also use one of the elements, this randomizer. So for students, they could walk up to the flat panel again, physically interact with this activity. If they click on the hat, it's going to give us a part of the bee, the thorax, and now it's going to be a student's job to click on and find the thorax. And then to continue the conversation, they can click on the plus sign and to explain the meaning of the thorax, and then to continue that conversation. So we're bringing it all together with this activity. We have a visual component. The labels are going to help students visually learn the parts of the bee. Auditory component, use discussion prompts to encourage the verbal learning. And kinesthetic learning, have students move to different groups to answer each question. Encouraging students to move around the room helps them to engage physically in the material and in the information in a new way that they may not always use. And like I showed you can use the hat to randomly select a part of the bee, which makes the activity more interesting and engaging for students. This activity is going to, again, really help students to make those connections and to apply their learning in a different way. I could differentiate this activity by, again, allowing students, we could work as a whole group, or I could have this activity available for students while they're practicing later and learning the parts of the bee and applying this information. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us as we took this journey of teaching and learning with multiple modalities. I hope that you have taken away a few new ideas on how to incorporate visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning. This quote here, tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn, really reminds me to pull in these different learning modalities. Thinking about how can we involve students physically in our lessons? How can I put on a new lens when it comes to lesson planning and think about incorporating the meaningful physical movement into my teaching and learning? Also, how could I incorporate some auditory components to allow students to hear information as they see information and as they physically interact with the information? Again, our goal is to have students make connections and remember information and differentiate our learning and just really make those meaningful learning experiences for students. Finally, how are we going to incorporate visuals for our students? What diagrams or pictures or videos or interactive dice or could we have available for our students to help them solidify their learning or solidify their understanding? And how could we even allow students to create their own visuals to demonstrate their understanding or to check student understanding? So my challenge for you today is to think about how will you involve your students? How will you involve your students in their learning using multiple modalities? How could you involve their sense of sight and sound? And how could you involve them in physical movement to help them access new information, make those new connections, and to demonstrate their own learning? I'd love to see any examples that you have using Smart Learning Suite and maybe using an activity that you saw today. You can tweet it out and make sure that you use hashtag #SmartChampion. It'd be great to see some of your ideas and to see some of these activities and lessons in action. Again, down here at
Awesome.
the, okay.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you have some more to say, please, Sarah.
Oh, I was just going to give a reminder that this file this slide here has some resources for you, and these are all quick links to view on how to create activities, how to access Smart Learning Suite online and workspaces, and also how to add YouTube videos, smart blocks, the pull tabs that I use throughout the presentation, and the interactive dice.